All right, welcome to the Cwic Media Come Follow Me series. We are covering the beginning of 2 Kings here. This is chapters 2 to 7. We're going to start in chapter 1. I want to dip in a little bit and set the stage here on Elisha as we get the ending events of the literal mantle passing from Elijah to Elisha. And again, here we have a dynamic duo here in Elijah and Elisha, where there's just all of these major miracles. I think that is an anchor point for us to look at what is happening here with them, because while we do see miracles often with some of the other prophets, Elijah is more like almost like a Moses figure, I think, and where the faith is so great in him against all odds, in a country where the people have completely turned against the Lord, that he is, it's not surprising that he is someone who holds the keys to something. He is that figure. He's one of those types of men that his faith is just so strong that he makes such a change in perhaps not the individuals that are there, but in us, in being able to see what he has done in his lifetime in trying to bring to pass the immortality and the eternal life of man and fulfill the purpose of God here. Now, let's go in and dip into chapter 1 first. I want to set a couple things up here, and as we move from Elijah to Elisha here. This is the end of Elisha's time. We see Ahaziah, who's the new king, turns to Beelzebub to learn if he will live. So why is this important? It's because they have turned to Baal in northern Israel. And, his father Ahab and his mother Jezebel, they are Baal worshipers. And of course, when you have a king and queen that turn to other gods, then usually the whole nation is going to turn to the other gods as well. This is what they push. This becomes part of the temple experience for them, part of their religion. Their prophets are prophets of Baal, etc. And Elijah is just kind of this wanderer. They know who he is, but he's kind of a wanderer and the one causing trouble in Israel. How is he causing trouble? Because he's teaching about, I would say, again, putting this into Christian terms, he's teaching about Jesus Christ. He's teaching about the doctrine of Christ and the principles of the gospel here. Now, let's move down here. We can see here in verse 3, an angel of the Lord says to Elijah the Tishbite, arise, go up to meet the messengers of the king of Samaria. That's Israel. And say unto them, is it not because there is not a God in Israel that ye go to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? See, there's no God of Israel in Israel. He's gone. There are very, very few people that are still strong and bound by testimony, so to speak, that are believing in Jehovah. And we'll see there's about 7,000 people, that's it, in the entire nation. So he turns to Beelzebub. Beelzebub, by the way, probably means Lord of the Flies. That's where we get the term, Lord of the Flies. The book, Lord of the Flies. Think of it in terms of this. You have a god that would control the insects that maybe spread disease. And so this is something that, if you're a Lord of the Flies, maybe you are the one in charge of health, therefore, and controlling where the bees and the flies, etc., would go. And so it's not 100% certainty that that's actually what that means, but that's what many believe is the meaning of Beelzebub, is the Lord of the Flies. So the God of Israel, or the king of Israel, turns specifically for his life to Beelzebub and not to Jehovah here. And not a surprise with what is going on here. And so the messengers of the king run into Elijah. And this is what he's saying. And he says, therefore, thus saith the Lord, thou shalt not come down from that bed on which thou art gone up. Right? Because he's sick. He fell through a lattice, but shalt surely die. He's telling them that the king is going to die, and then Elijah departs. So the messengers go back. They speak with Ahaziah, the king. And he said unto them, what manner of man was he which came up to meet you and told you these words? And they answered him, and listen to how this is defined here. He was a hairy man, and girt with a girdle of leather about his loins. And he said, the king said, oh, it's Elijah the Tishbite. Why would they know that from this? What does this mean? Well, if we go over to the Gospels and we read about John the Baptist, we get something very, very similar. Look at Matthew 3, verse 4. And the same John had his raiment of camel's hair, so an animal skin, and a leathern girdle about his loins, animal skin. And his meat was locusts and wild honey. So almost the exact same description that John the Baptist gets here. So this would be a defining who he is, in a sense, a prophet of God. And I think that's important for us to understand what's going to happen here with Elisha in a little bit. This is a covering, an animal skin covering that is placed on Elijah, that he wears. And so, back to 2 Kings 1, verse 9, then the king sent unto him a captain of 50, like Laban had his captain of 50. And he went up to him, and behold, he sat on the top of a hill, and he spake unto him, thou man of God, the king hath said, come down. Right? He's not happy with Elijah. And Elijah answered and said to the captain of 50, if I be a man of God, then let fire come down from heaven. And well, we've seen this before already with Elijah, right? With the sacrifice at Mount Carmel, where the priests of Baal could not bring down fire from heaven. And Elijah can. Well, he's going to do it again, but this time instead of the oxen being barbecued here, it's the 50 men that are consumed by the fire. So we get here an example of those that are crossing the prophet, and Elijah calls down fire. Well, this is very Old Testament. But again, consider where this civilization is at. They are pretty much lost at this point. Losing 50 men here is tragic, and but it's they're gone. I mean, this isn't quite flood time like in Noah's day, but they're pretty much gone in terms of wickedness. And so another 50 came, and Elijah sends down fire again to the other 50. Finally, a third time, a captain is sent up, and he's kind of like, okay, I see what's going on here. And so he brings his 50 men up to the hill to see Elijah, and he says, please spare our lives. And Elijah says, okay, fine. I will spare your life. It says, and the angel of the Lord said unto Elijah, go down with him, the captain of the 50, the third group. Be not afraid of him. And he arose and went down with him unto the king. And he says this again, right? This is the author, I think, is trying to get this clear to us. As thou hast sent messengers to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, is it not because there is no God in Israel to inquire of his word? Right? There's no the temples they have, the altars they have. There's no building up, the festivals they would have. There's no God of Israel currently in Israel. Therefore he says, thou shalt not come down off that bed on which thou art gone up, but thou shalt surely die. So he dies, and Jehoram reigns in his stead. So I just want to lay that out there. We see these 50 and then these 50, so 100 men are killed by Elijah pulling down the fire from heaven. Lightning, I would imagine, right? Now, chapter 2 then, here's where we get this transfer of the mantle. And it came to pass when the Lord would take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. So would take up, right? Everybody knows what's going to happen with Elijah. This is interesting. They all know he's going to be translated. Those that believe in him, and maybe those that don't even. That this is a common knowledge among this group, that Elijah is going to be taken up to heaven. And they go to Bethel, and the sons of the prophets here at Bethel, they say to Elisha, knowest thou that the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? Right? So it's, again, thy master from thy head. So it's the prophet at the top of the hierarchical structure here on earth is going to be removed. What's going to happen to you? Well, that's how they're setting up the story of the mantle being passed. The same thing happens in Jericho. Do you know that the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? Interesting, he says from thy head, right? Think about what that's saying there. We want to get a description of what's going on, but later on here with these she-bears, I don't think we quite understand what's happening here. What is he saying? That twice now we see Elijah is going to be removed from thy head. Now you can say that's the head of the hierarchical structure. True. But what else does that mean? It's going to be removed from thy head. Let's keep going here. So as this happens here, they stand at the Jordan, and Elijah took his mantle and wrapped it together and smote the waters, and they divided hither and thither, so that they too went over on dry ground, like Moses, like Joshua. And so the Jordan splits apart. These are another great prophet, Elijah. And when they were gone over the river Jordan, Elijah says to Elisha, what shall I do for thee? Before I be taken away from thee. And Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. Okay, we can say even upon his head. And so that's what he asks for. He wants to be like Elijah. He wants to be able to carry the mantle like Elijah has. And so that's the story of the transfer here. And it came to pass as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire. A chariot. This is like a throne. And horses of fire, and parted them both asunder, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. Okay, that's a lot of imagery there. And I think this has to do very temple-centered type of imagery here. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel, and the horsemen thereof. And he saw him no more, and he took hold of his own clothes, and rent them in two pieces. And he took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back and stood by the bank of Jordan. Okay. So now we start moving into Elisha and his miracles, and the ability to carry the mantle. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and smote the waters, and said, where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he also had smitten the waters, they parted hither and thither, and Elisha went over. Okay, so he has been ordained here to carry the mantle. He has the priesthood. He is the prophet. And he does the same thing with the mantle that Elijah did, because he has the mantle. He has the authority here. And when the sons of the prophets which were to view at Jericho saw him, they said, the spirit of Elijah doth rest on Elisha. And they came to meet him and bowed themselves to the ground before him. And so Elisha then starts with his miracles, right? We're getting the author showing us that the mantle has passed, and the same mantle that gave Elijah the power of miracles is going to give the power to Elisha. And so he's going to take water that is not pure, and he's going to clean it. And he went forth unto the spring of the waters, and cast the salt in there, and said, thus saith the Lord, I have healed these waters. This is something Moses did also. There shall not be from thence any more death or barren land. And then we get the story of the she-bears, this odd story here. And he went up from thence unto Bethel, and as he was going up by the way, there came forth little children out of the city. So this is youth. This would be probably young men. And mocked him, and said unto him, go up, thou bald head, go up, thou bald head. go one more verse, and we'll go into what's happening, I think, here. And he turned back and looked on them and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood and tear 42 children of them. Now, you see these words of children, and it's like, what in the world? This is a prophet of God. Well, it's probably teenage boys. Not that is that much better, but let's put this into context a little bit here and kind of get an idea of what's happening here with the story. Again, these are probably maybe a band of young men that maybe they are completely wicked. They're part of a civilization that is almost completely lost to Jehovah here. And so the she-bears come out, they tear the 42 young men apart. So what is happening? Why is this here? What does this matter? Well, remember, we just had them mocking him, saying, "Go up, thou bald head, thou bald head." We've been getting this description of Elijah, where he is a hairy man, and he has a leather girdle around him, his loins. So it's a covering of animal skins. And that it has to do with him being the prophet and the power of the representative of God. So here you would think that Elisha is probably very similar and doing the same things. We were just told that from the other men that, do you know that Elijah is going to be removed from thy head? Thy head. So what is bald mean? What does this mean? Could it be that it's a part of shame and he's balding? Sure, we can take it more literally. And we can look directly at the idea of the covering. See, we're talking about covering and nakedness here. We're talking about the covering of the garment that would be on him, the animal skins that would be upon him. And they're saying, you're bald, you're uncovered, you're naked, your nakedness is showing, your shame is showing. Now, if Elijah was removed from his head and now they're saying he is bald, what might they really be saying? They might really be saying, you are not the prophet. You're not Elijah. This does not, you're completely exposed. Your covering is not there as it was with Elijah. And so if we look at it that way, we see these threads of covering and garment and nakedness, exposure, baldness, and then removing Elijah from his head. I think we get a better understanding of what these young men are probably saying to him. It's about shame. It's about not being the prophet. It's about the covering of the garments that represent being a representative of Jehovah. Now, that's not a good reason to go out and say, I'm going to send these bears out to you, but that's what he does. Again, we can be Monday morning historians and say this is horrible. I don't know the situation completely, what's going on here. Maybe they were after him. Maybe they were going to kill him. Who knows? And so they come out and and remember, animals are the ones that come out and tear these boys apart, to these 2 she-bears. So there are a couple of other stories where we get this type of an example about nakedness and garment and shame and cursing. Of course, there's the Garden of Eden, right, with Adam and Eve. And they are naked, and they need to be covered. What are they going to be covered with? They're going to be covered with a garment that is going to be a covering from the Lord. The Lord will make them a garment. And so in some sense, that is a Yom Kippur, a covering, like Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, that's going to be placed upon them. And of course, they are cursed and cast out of the Garden of Eden. And then, of course, you have Noah and Ham, where it looks to me like Noah is in some type of a temple vision or having a temple experience, and Ham comes in and Noah is exposed and he's naked, whatever that means. And then Ham is cursed, right? So this goes right along those lines. This has to do with covering and priesthood and atonement and nakedness and shame and cursing that would go right along with this. Now in chapter 3, we've got Jehoram and Jehoshaphat of Judah join forces. This is one of the rare times that Israel and Judah are actually going to fight together, and they're going to fight against Moab. In chapter 4, we get more miracles here, where just like Elijah had raised a dead son for a widow, guess what? Elisha's going to do the same thing. With the widow, he is going to multiply the oil that she has so that there is no end of this. And then as she says, and the woman conceived and bare a son. So she had been asking for a son. So this is a miracle for her to receive the son. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said, my head, my head. And he said to a lad, carry him to his mother. And he sat on her knees till noon and then died. So this miracle is given to her and then it's removed. It's kind of like Isaac is going to be taken. This miracle is given to Abraham and Sarah, and then he's going to be sacrificed. That doesn't happen, but same idea here, right? The son is going to be taken, but then saved. So the widow asks for Elisha. And in 32, when Elisha was coming to the house, behold, the child was dead and laid upon his bed. He went in therefore, and shut the door upon them twain and prayed unto the Lord. So he prays first, and then he lays upon the child, puts his mouth upon his mouth, his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands, and he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. This is really interesting. Why does this happen? This is the same thing Elijah did. He stretched himself out over the child, over a widow's child, and raised him from the dead. So the warmth of the body, that seems to us so archaic thinking, right, in some sense. But this is how it was done. This is what they did. Elisha copied what Elijah did. And what even with blessings and ordinations and healing the sick, what do? The hands of the priesthood holder go on the head of the person. It is a physical thing. Whenever possible, right? You anoint physically, and then you put your hands on the head physically of the person. So there is something to that in the healing power. Jesus does the same thing for the most part. In chapter 5, we get the story of Captain Naaman from Syria and the leprosy that he has, and Elisha is going to heal him, or the Lord is going to heal him through Elisha. In verse 1, now Naaman, captain of the host of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master and honorable, because by him the Lord had given him deliverance unto Syria. He was also a mighty man in valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies and had brought away captive out of the land of Israel. So there's these skirmishes, these battles that are going to happen. They had brought out of Israel a little maid. So they stole a woman, a girl, maybe many of them in a battle. And she waited on Naaman's wife. So she is a servant. She's made a servant. And she said unto her mistress, would God, my Lord, were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. So this is a believing woman. This is going to be a very rare thing that believes in Elisha as the prophet of God, and saying to her, this leprosy would be removed from Captain Naaman if he would just be able to go to the prophet. So Elisha speaks with the king of Israel and says, let Captain Naaman come to me. And the king says, fine. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come to thee again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. Well, it seems awfully odd. I mean, it seems maybe even more odd than, hey, I'm going to stretch myself upon you and heal you. So Naaman's mad about this. That's interesting. I think when we think about ourselves, oh, I'm supposed to pray for 7 days. What do I need to do to change here? What is the behavior that I need to show my faith through? If I am looking for some type of miracle, if I'm looking for a change in my life, am I willing to exercise the faith? And that's always the issue, right? That's what Jesus does continually in the miracles that he performs in mortality. He always checks the faith of the person first before that miracle is performed. So his servants finally talk him into doing it. And he went down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Jordan has got a lot of legacy, a lot of heritage here, as we've seen, even just with Elijah and Elisha going, using the mantle to split the waters, to part the waters. Here we get, again, Naaman going to the Jordan. Of course, Christ is going to be baptized in the Jordan. John the Baptist baptizes in the Jordan. Joshua brings the children of Israel across and parts the Jordan. And so he returned, and Captain Naaman returns to the man of God, he and all his company, and he came and stood before him, and he said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. And then he offers him money, and he says, I'm not taking any of that. Then in chapter 6 here, I like this story quite a bit. It's metaphorical, as well as probably literal. He causes an axe to float, which is kind of interesting, because that is a story that is common in the ancient Near East. You would have had this with the goddess Ishtar in her temple in the Middle East, a similar story. So this would have been something that the people would have known about, that would be, they have a reference point to this. And it's not that they would believe in Ishtar necessarily, but it would be that type of a story of a floating battle axe that would be common to them. And here Elisha's making this happen. This story actually happen before their eyes. Then the Syrians surround them in Israel. Then we get the battle with the Syrians. And there's obviously, again, a lot of skirmishes going on here. We've already found this out with Captain Naaman and the servant, etc., the servant girl. But in verse 8 here, then the king of Syria warred against Israel and took counsel with his servant, saying, In such and such a place shall be my camp. And the man of God sent unto the king of Israel, saying, Beware that thou pass not such a place, for thither the Syrians are come down. So somehow Elisha is warned and told that this is where the Syrians are going to be. And again, in these chapters, just like in the Book of Mormon, you get the prophet of God very involved with these battles and telling the kings what to do. And here he says to them, don't go here because it's a trap. And so the king sends, and so the king is told that this is where they are, and they've been saved a couple times because they haven't gone to this area where there would be an ambush. And so the heart of the king of Syria was sore troubled for this thing, because why are they not coming through here? They always do. And he called his servants and said unto them, Will ye not shew me which of us is for the king of Israel? In other words, who here has told the Israelites that we are waiting here for them? And one of the servants says, It's none of us, but Elisha the prophet that is in Israel telleth the king of Israel the words that thou hast spokest in thy bedchamber. So the king of Syria sends out the messengers or the troops, and they go out and they find Elisha and his servant. And when the servant of the man of God, it says, was risen early and gone forth, behold, a host compassed the city both with horses and chariots. And his servant said unto him, Alas, my master, how shall we do? And he said, Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And that's obviously, it's a very commonly referenced scripture. It's a great scripture because what we're going to learn here is that we are sometimes blind to what is actually around us, what is actually supporting us. And of course, we can take this more directly and talk about the support of angels or the support of God that is around us all the time. But sometimes maybe we also might discount the support and love that we have, say, for example, from family and friends and ward members and priesthood holders and sisters and all those that would do so many things for us and sacrifice so much for us, that we forget about those things. And instead of understanding, let's open our eyes more and understand the love that actually is there. Maybe there's a lot more than I thought there was. And so Elisha says, I pray thee, Lord, open his eyes, the servant's eyes, that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. So this is about, again, it's about an awareness. It's an awareness of what is happening there. We can call it, piercing the veil here, but I don't know that the veil needs completely pierced to always understand this and to see this in our lives. And when they came down, Elisha prayed unto the Lord and said, smite this people, I pray thee, with blindness. So the servant now is going to pierce the veil and see the chariots of fire around him. On the other end of this, the Syrians are going to be blinded where they cannot see. So this, I love the metaphor here because, again, we are blind so often. It's just a matter of blindness of something that is already there for us. And yet we're not aware of it because we're not in tune. We're not in tune with the Spirit, perhaps, enough to see the support or the pathway forward. And so he smites the troops with blindness. They follow him. They go to Samaria. They end up in Samaria. They're no longer blind when they get to Samaria, and they're like, okay, here we are, right in the den of thieves here for them. Right in the capital of Israel, in Samaria. And so the king of Israel says to Elisha, should I smite these men? Here they came all the way here for us. And he says, no, but set bread and water before them that they may eat and drink and go to their master. Okay, so then the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, gathers his host and goes up and besieges Samaria, right? Which means he's going to surround Samaria and starve them out. That's the idea here. That's usually what happens. And then there's some very tragic things that are going to happen here. They some of them resort to cannibalism. Remember, it hasn't been that long since they've already had a famine here with no rain. That when for 3.5 years with Elijah. And here they're going to be besieged and they have nothing to eat. And Elisha is going to perform miracles here and create an abundance of food eventually for all of them. So this is the story then with Elijah and Elisha, these two great prophets with these amazing miracles that they perform against all odds. What I mean by that is against a nation that is seeped in iniquity and idol worship. And yet here are these men that are carrying the mantle of God and exercising an immense amount of faith, as we should, even when we are surrounded by troops of the adversary and surrounded by obstacles that are in our lives, that, they see the support that they have. They see, and that, I think that's a kind of a part of faith. They are able to see this. They're able to understand this, that there is support for them. There is a rallying love and support behind them in their righteousness. And sometimes that's hard for us to see. that the Lord loves each one of us and has a plan for us. And we might want to try and be a little bit more aware of that. Thanks for listening.